My name's Adam Oliver. I'm a behavioural public policy person, I suppose, at the LSE. I think this is the 7th annual LSE Behavioural Public Policy Lecture. We started it in 2017, and we've managed to hold it every year, even through the pandemic. And previous speakers have included Cass Sunstein, George Lowenstein, Nick Chater, and a few others as well. This is the first lecture that we've had in-house post-pandemic, actually, and it's obviously a great pleasure for me at least, and I think for all of us, and for the LSE, that Lucia Reisch is going to present the lecture today. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure all of you do know Lucia, but she's one of the leading behavioural economists working in the policy space in the world. She joined the Reisch Institute for Behavioural Economics and Policy for sustainable behaviours, right? Focus on sustainable behaviours, etc. As its leader, basically, on its foundation. And I think that the Reisch Institute is going to become, or probably already is actually, one of the leading institutes in this space, in this growing field, in this new field of public policy in the world. So it's really an honour for us to have Lucia speak today. Lucia is going to speak about behaviourally informed food policies. There's so much she could speak about, and I just would like to say at the beginning, actually, that I'm really grateful to Lucia because I've been trying to establish a number of behavioural initiatives, journals, conferences, and the like over the years, and Lucia has been one of the most supportive people out of anybody that I've approached in helping me to try to develop these initiatives. And without her, I'm not so sure whether I could have developed some of them. So I'm really very thankful to you, Lucia, for your contributions, and long may they continue. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lucia. Lucia is going to speak for 45 minutes. Then we'll have about 25 minutes for discussion and comments from the floor. And then after that, there'll be a reception just outside with some wine and soft drinks and some little things to eat. So, Lucia.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to Adam to give me the opportunity to present some of my work, some of our work, the work of the Reisch Institute, which you heard is a new kid on the block in Cambridge. And we're all pretty excited that we now have the opportunity and soon also the rooms to actually do what we like to do most, which is doing research in behavioral economics and behavioral public policy. And the focus, as Adam said, is indeed in all kinds of sustainable behaviors, not just consumers, but we also look into organizations, into politicians, business leaders, etc. But today the focus is on behaviorally informed policy. And let me start to talk about another country, not the UK, not my home country, Germany, but Denmark. That's where I spent the last almost 20 years. And it's always safer to talk about other countries, right? Than one's own. That's also one of the reasons why I chose that hill. But seriously, I worked a lot with the city of Copenhagen, with the government of Denmark, to develop in the last 20 years a more sustainable, which means plant-based and less food wasting food system. So this is where a lot of my experience comes from. And actually 2 weeks ago, I saw this headline, and I was very, very happy to see it, because it says that the Danish Parliament, all the parties in the Danish Parliament have agreed to give about 80 million pounds to farmers, retailers, to the food sector to promote plant-based diets. And that might not seem extraordinary. It kind of is surprising, because usually there are many parties in the Danish Parliament and they do not agree on anything. On the other hand, it might also be kind of the culmination of a development that started about almost 20 years ago with the Nordic Manifesto, which was very much about organic, seasonal, if you want, sustainable diets within developing a special culture. So I was pretty happy to see that, and I also think, or I thought, one of my associations was that this famous Overton window actually has finally moved to have politicians, but that also means voters, people, accept much more also intensive policies, because these 80 millions are not just subsidies kind of happily distributed, they come with very, very solid policy proposals. So something has happened, and Denmark is very small and maybe also not that important, but I'm increasingly seeing that. I see that in Germany, I see that in France, I see that in Italy. So things are happening in the food policy sector. So Copenhagen, as I said, just to finish that up, has always been quite innovative. So they have a food strategy, they have a climate strategy, which is very much along the line that you probably think it is. And in 2025, the action plan will be evaluated, and then we'll see what is happening. And that was kind of a prelude to my talk today. That's the plan. Why are food systems more relevant than ever? Which are promising entry points? Why should food policies be behaviorally informed? What works for and how? What are the risks, and where do we go from here? So it's a lecture, so please bear with me, and we will be rewarded with drinks and nibbles afterwards. I hope so. Yeah, so there's this new meme that cows are the new coal, and which is actually somehow not completely stupid, because about 1/3 of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions is actually linked to food. The largest chunk of those emissions comes from agriculture and land use, which is also mainly ruminants, cows and a few others. And just actually 2 days ago, this study was published by someone from Colombia, showing that the food system alone could lead to global warming by 1 degree until the end of the century, just by itself. So even if we hold all the other influence on climate change, the food system is really in the focus. So, and it's of course mostly methane that is to blame, which, as you probably know, is about 80 times as powerful as CO2 on a 20-year base. So there's a lot of truth to the meme, and so Partha Gupta from Cambridge University this is something I found in his review. Once we have wind fossil fuels, it will be food that has the largest climate impact, and that's probably the case. Let's look a little bit closer. The good thing is that we have excellent data today. There are several groups worldwide looking into working with really good data sets, and this is one of them. I could have chosen another one. So in the left-hand panel, you see on top there is plant-based diets, and you see rice and wheat are actually not that harmless, so to speak. In the lower panel, it's on animal-based food commodities. And here, as we already said, it's beef, and it has to do with ruminants, so also milk, cheese. And what we can easily see is that about the double of greenhouse gas impact, which is quite something. On the right-hand panel, that's also interesting because that's a spatial distribution, because of course these are average numbers, and average numbers rarely help. It is when you go to the right-hand panel, the top one is the total emissions from food production. The middle one are the emissions from plant-based food, looks much greener and friendlier, and the lower one are the emissions from animal-based foods. And again, it's very interesting to see where do the bulk of those CO2 emissions come from, and it's also probably something you had expected. It's the big countries, So we have China and India and the US. These are total numbers. And because these are total numbers, of course, you rightly say, what about per capita? Here is also very recent data from only meat supply per capita per region in the development over the last 30 years. And what is quite striking is, I think, two things. One is that China, East Asia, Pacific, Central Asia have an immense amount of growth in these types of meat. In the high-income countries, there's hardly any growth, and that has to do with the fact that they are already in this, what is sometimes called the second nutrition transition. Meat is not the big thing. We also see that the real, poorer countries, sub-Saharan Africa, has hardly increased their meat consumption, which is not sure whether that's good or bad, because many of those countries would actually, nutritional levels would increase with some animal-based diets. So there is that's probably a more interesting picture, because it shows that it has a lot to do about which region of the world we have to talk about. Now, obviously, food policy has to find a solution for climate change, but climate change is, of course, not everything. That is the latest IPCC report, AR6, and the special thing about this report is that it's the first report that features a chapter specifically on the demand side policies, mitigating demand by using demand side policies. All the other reports before have focused solely on the supply side. So that's a real innovation, and so full transparency, I'm a contributing author to this specific chapter, and you might not be surprised that also behavioral policies have found their way as one of the many possible solutions on mitigating climate change. But there's more. There's also biodiversity loss, and I already cited the Disruptor review. Biodiversity has come to the fore, well, the latest by the end of last year, when there was the COP15 in Montreal, and finally something got moving. So it's like almost a Paris moment for biodiversity that has now, it's kind of has triggered some real movements in the policy world. And why is it relevant for food? The food sector is actually responsible for 90% of the global deforestation, and also 9 of the 10 companies that have the largest negative impact on biodiversity are food companies. So the link is indeed very, very close. And there's more. There is this not new, but maybe more intensified conflict on land use. Something that has been there, of course, all the time, but the less fertile land we have, the more intense the conflict becomes. Yeah, so there are obviously there's a whole range of issues to be covered and tackled by food policy in different levels and different priorities in the different regions of this world, but they're all out there. And so to give it a little bit more systematic, this is I think a pretty good model. I took it from the UNEP report that shows the interactions between those emergencies. So of course it's not an add-on, it's really a system with feedback loop, with feed-forward loops, with interactions that all impact on human well-being. So kind of this, I think this figure nicely shows the mutually reinforcing character of those problems that are out there. And as we also know as behavioral scientists, information gets it's easier digested and more readily used when we are more concrete, when we show that things are actually happening where we live. So I also kind of like and included that map that shows where on this world those emergencies are actually coming to the fore. And these are things that are happening as we speak, with tipping points, and some of them with a high probability, others with lower probability, all based on the IPCC reports. To make it a little bit more systematic, I try to list the different dimensions of those risks and that are at the same time dimensions of food policy. So sources, sinks, but also health. We have talked a lot about health, obesity, malnutrition, often in the same country, particularly in emerging countries and developing countries. You have this in the rural areas, you have the malnutrition problem. In urban areas, you have an immense obesity problem. But also in the UK, I just read yesterday that 3/4 of in England of people aged 45 to 74 are either overweight or obese. 3/4, that's a lot. That is a lot of health cost. Yeah. Of course, also economics, supply chain resilience. I think at least the pandemic kind of got rid of the illusion that we can always buy everything. And now in the UK, we have the big salad and tomato crisis. Yeah, so we probably cannot take things for granted. And the big issue of equality and equity, and also, as I already mentioned, land use, not just the traditional functions, food, feed, fuel, fun, flora, fauna, but also new demands regarding carbon farming, carbon sequestration, and also a rather new debate on sharing versus sparing. Not sure whether you came across that one, which is, I think, will also gain an attraction in the future. Which is basically the big question: how do we organize our agriculture? So should we rather have high yield agriculture in a limited space, a limited area, and then spare a lot of area for biodiversity and for natural parks, for instance? Or should we do what we have actually, we, like the sustainability crowd, has propagated the last 20 years, extensive agriculture, but on more area and with lower yield. And so these are discussions that have been going on in some countries of this world all along, but they are now coming closer. So much for the big picture of food policy. If we want to change things, of course, we need entry points, we need promising levers of change. And again, a model might help. This is taken from Whittle and adapted a little bit. What it nicely shows are two things. One is that, yes, these are really systems, and the food system is embedded in other systems. It also shows, and this is why it's relevant for behavioral policies, that this is about actors. You have in the center, you have actors, and they do things. There's activities along the value and along the supply chain. It's not just the consumers where we tend to focus a lot on, it's the whole system. So all of those actors and all of their actions are potential entry points and potential things to tackle. And because these in the end are actually human actors, it's so important to think of the human factor when designing policies. So kind of factoring in the human factor. Do not just think about all the technological advances, which is extremely important, but also think that in the end, someone is actually taking on the technology. Someone has to go and buy those plant-based burgers. Someone has to go and do and sort the waste. So there's a lot of human action in the whole food system. And this is also something that the UK Climate Change Committee found out in their latest report, that 62% of the emission reductions in the UK depend actually on behavior. And then they list a few: adaptation of new technologies, products, but also changes in lifestyles, including eating less meat. So not only, but including also eating less meat. So when we think about policies, we usually, me as an economist, as a behavioral economist, start to think at least about market failures, because market failures legitimize policies policymakers to intervene. And these are the traditional ones that we have all looked at for a while. So this is about external effects of food consumption that are not internalized. We talk about adverse incentives, subsidies for fossil fuel, but also subsidies for products food products that might have substantial negative externalities themselves, but also be not exactly healthy. Social externalities, because they do impact on the whole society. Someone will have to cure all those non-communicable diseases that 3/4 of the population will impose on society. Oligopolistic structures, particularly on the retail level. I don't know exactly how that is in the UK, but at least in Germany and in Denmark and in France, a few markets over, it's very, very, it's extreme. So there's an extreme bottleneck at the retail level. And of course, those actors are extremely powerful because they can really curate what is at least on the supermarket shelves. And then also something that is more relevant for emerging markets, but also we see a lot of that happening in Eastern Europe, the crowding out of locally produced food by supermarkets in countries that have traditionally actually very well-functioning informal sector. And so all that changes accessibility, availability, and affordability of the food. Then there's a second group of market failures that you can call them behavioral. I will not start a definition discussion here now, but it's about internalities, so the costs that are inflicted costs and benefits to the individual. So it's not about external effects, but internal effects. And again, for the individual, the short-term preference for processed food, high in sugar, fat, and fat, comes usually with larger long-term costs. Then this whole topic of information. Yes, we know there's information asymmetry in terms of health and sustainability of food. We also know that long-term effects are hard to act on for most people because of hyperbolic discounting. And we also know that there's a lot of consumer confusion, not knowing, lack of food literacy, but also distrust in products, in markets. And some of that is just happens. Some of it is also intended. So a lot of disinformation or consumer confusion is actually produced because it helps, right? I mean, the less knowledgeable consumers are, the more confused they are, the easier you can manipulate people in the end. And in the field of food, it's also really tricky because some of those heuristics that we have taught consumers for a long time, like buy local, buy organic, they're not wrong, but they're not always right. So you get all these mixed communication that when you just open up 3 different newspapers or open up on your screen, it's really not easy. So there is this big barrier because solutions are not always easy and clear. And then there is also another factor that I actually looked into in more detail together with Kerr Sunstein and Micha Kaiser, another colleague from the Alarian Center, that there's also this thing, and you might know that from yourself by critical introspection, we do not always want to know everything. So we are not the 24-hour rational information processing robot. We're not, because some of the information is really quite uncomfortable. It makes us unhappy. We do not want to be unhappy. And even though we know it could have negative externalities on the environment, on society, or negative internalities on ourselves, there is, and this is something we found, we looked in 7 different countries, we did run surveys, asked for people's willingness to pay for not to get information also about food and health, and we were quite surprised to see the level of kind of blissful ignorance that people were actually interested in having. And I mean, honestly, I can fully understand that, because you don't want always to kind of have all the information in your face. And then there are things like we really might really not want to know. Think of pet food. About 20% of the calories produced and consumed is actually for pets in the high-income countries, not for humans. Alcohol, coffee. Terrible. Huh? I mean, it's like you're a real spoil sport if you start to. I know that. But so anyway, so even if it is there, we do not always want to know. So what to do? And I think here is really an entrance for behaviorally informed policy, because there's other ways around it. When people do not want or can't or are simply overwhelmed, we have a limited bandwidth, there must be other ways, and these are behaviorally informed ways. What we also have to have are actually good models. And I think we're in a pretty lucky and good position in behavioral economics and behavioral public policy, because there are lots of good models out there. I picked one that I've been working, I'm basically a consumer researcher since many, many years. It's a very traditional one, if you want to go, dating back to 1995 by 2 good colleagues from Denmark, George Hersen and Folke Nylander. They come up with this MOAB model explaining behavior and explaining behavior change. So it's about motivation, it's about the opportunity to actually act on something, act on the motivation, the ability to do it, and that all somehow miraculously ends up in behavior. And the deeper model that is behind it is something that probably you know is the old classic theory of reciprocal determinism from Albert Bandura, that basically says behavior, cognition, affect, and the environment are closely interconnected and influence each other. So it's not A to B, but it's also B to A. And that is important, also for what I want to convey a little bit later in the talk. And of course, there's personality influence and probably a lot more. But I think what I said, even if you're not happy about that model, there will be others. There is a plethora of good, solid, validated models around for explaining, being able to explain, and therewith also predict and also influence consumer behavior on that level. One thing that is less often done, and I think that is really important, and this is when, again, behavioral economics comes in, is to see in which setting and in which type of actually decision is these models, how they work in this type of decisions. So this is a newer model, the decision cube, and what does it do? It shows very nicely that it very much also behavior change. Behavior very much depends on the type of decision. So some decisions are very much pre-structured. There's very little leeway. Some decisions are very significant for one because they might have to do with our self-identity. So in Generation Z is known or said to be known that they do not define themselves via material goods, but through food, and particularly not about the food they eat, but the food they do not eat. Right? So each generation has its own products for self-identification. So for some people that might be very central what they eat, what they do not eat. For others less so. Then also the level of reflectiveness and consciousness is of course play a role. This is where all these habits or system 1, system 2 decisions actually play in. So these 3 dimensions will also have a different impact in those different settings, and that's the kind of why this is actually a cube in the different context of social spatial context, cultural context. I mean, food and food consumption is highly culturally and highly socially. Many more calories are consumed in groups and together than when we're on our own. So that really, really matters. Social affiliation and all kind of social interaction. So this is complex. And which means maybe not that easy to steer, but it also means many different ways, many different entry points that we might want to try and test and also maybe put together and make little policy packages out of them and see how far we go. I said several times about, what we're talked about the models and talked about the different policies, but what is actually the goal? Maybe I should also say at least something about it. And again, I think the good news is that we're today talking about really a sustainable diet. So it's not just a climate-friendly one or a biodiversity-friendly one. And this is a kind of, I would say, almost an innovation that dates back to a workshop by the FAO in 2010, published in 2012. That's the first time when the nexus, I showed you all those kind of systems in the beginning, the nexus between healthiness and sustainability and climate friendliness has been established also in the policy world. And the FAO is a powerful actor, right? Because it's not just what they write, but they have a lot of also financial power, political power. So that is, I would say, probably since the year 2012, that is when this nexus thinking of a sustainable diet really took off. In 2019, the idea of a planetary health diet has been published. Many of you might know it, by the E-Lancet Commission. Worked many years on it. The interesting thing is, again, I mean, they all go, some could say they're more or less the same. It's not quite true. The interesting thing about the planetary health diet is that it comes with very concrete scales of different types of food. And it also comes with a promise that if everyone on Earth would actually would choose such a diet, it's scalable. So everyone of at least the present population level could have a healthy and planetary diet. And the latest kid on the block, if you want, is that. The Plant Forward diet. It's something that has been developed in the US. Over here, we rather say plant-based diet or field-grown. You already sense there's a lot of framing going on here, right? So it's probably, I mean, that's a suspicion of mine, called Plant Forward, which basically means towards a plant-based diet, because in the US, it's I mean, you're a communist when you even just talk about plant-based diets or talk about a veggie day or something like that, literally. So it needs a more careful language, and I think this is also what's expressed here. But it doesn't really matter. It all goes into the direction of less ruminant meat, also less food waste, and also culturally embedded and acceptable, and also tasty. So this is where we want to go. The question is how we do that, how to reach such diets in practice. And again, I picked one pretty influential example. That is a model based at least on the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition, which is actually based here in London, and looks specifically at the food systems in low and middle income countries, so a lot in the Global South, and it's something we do not do enough. So that was also one of the reasons I wanted to bring it here. And what does it show? It shows that in this approach, and they are consulting policymakers, largely some also companies, but largely multinational, multinational companies, but also international stakeholders such as the OECD and the UN. So you have if you would read through what we of course do not do, you have the whole policy toolbox. You have laws, you have technology, you have regulation, you have information, you have education, and you have something that they call down here, behavioral nudges via carefully designed taxes and subsidies. So there's also the kind of acknowledgement that yes, behaviorally informed tools are useful. So that's good. That's a very important point. And then I think it's also very useful because what it does, it doesn't just list those different policy tools, but it really looks at the mechanisms again and the entry points. So it puts in the middle our what we call the AAA, which is availability, accessibility, affordability, and of course also desirability. That is also very relevant, particularly for food, because food is also about taste. If it's not, it's about taste and culture. So that might be less so in other consumption fields, but for food, it's really very, very relevant. So ultimately, at least when I look at that with my behavioral lens and my disciplinary background, I see a lot of kind of behavioral lens in that model. And as I said, I think it's a quite an influential one. And that brings us directly to the third point, behaviorally informed food policies. And again, I picked a line from the IPCC report, of course, from the chapter that deals with demand-side policies. And yes, luckily the panel concluded after doing a huge evidence review that behavioral interventions can increase the efficacy of pricing, mandates, subsidies, and taxes. For the experts here in the room, they will probably see this is about making existing policies more effective. It does not talk about behavioral tool sets as defaults, for instance. That has something to do with the type of evidence, the type of studies that were actually covered. And why do we need that? We need those behavioral interventions because of four things. Change is really difficult, and one reason is actually the limits of human nature, and this is what behavioral economists, of course, and behavioral scientists in general know all about. So this is about our biases and our heuristics. This is about the tyranny of convenience that we fall prey to. This is about I just read kind of something like food neophobia. I just read that 20 of the 20 most cooked meals in the UK are all meat-based. It's not that easy to change diets in such a setting. Of course, we have a limited range, although we are able to change. There might be other priorities, and it's not easy. The second issue is also the nature of the problem itself, and that is, of course, when we talk about climate change, biodiversity, these are all very big, complex problems with long-term effects. We know that people tend to be better in acting on short-term effects, so it's pretty far away. It sometimes happens at the other end of the world, and there's very little feedback. We thrive in feedback. So it's a typical, one of the typical problems that are really at odds with human nature. And also we talk about, with probabilistic harms, attribution is not always very clear. What are really the results of our own behavior, and etc., etc. Also, there's, particularly with food, I think one problem is that there's no one specific million. It's kind of the collusion of thousands, millions of people who it somehow happens, and that is really difficult to tackle. The third is really, if you want, the nature or the fabric of society, because particularly in the food sector, we briefly talked about the oligopoly, but that's probably not all. So thinking of society works, we always think about power relations, and also in the food sector, as in other sectors, there are very powerful lobbies trying to, acting as barriers for pretty good food policies. And this is, of course, also something that is not easily overcome. And finally, the incentives of the political system. This is maybe not specific for the food sector, but it does play a role because we know the problem for political economy, short-term cycles, that people want to get re-elected. Politicians try to move the costs to the future, to future land, because they hope they won't be there anymore. So very systematic problems that make it quite difficult. And I think, again, I'm coming back to that several times, I think this is why behaviorally informed policy is really potentially very effective. And at least in my world, for my reading, the essence is more or less this. The first is about the view of the human beings. We try to understand, we try to predict, we try to influence with policies. And I think we all agree about bounded rationality, but there's also something called, that I really like, it's the concept of behavioral capability. So this is actually based on the capability approach, that kind of the idea of taking the whole human being with all its capabilities and skills and potential to learn and to change, but at the same time acknowledging also the limits of limited bandwidth and biases and heuristics. I think this is a view of the individual that is currently developing, which I find really, really helpful The second is the behavioral lens, making use of specific behavioral approaches to understand and predict. And there's, as I already said, multiple theories, and there's a lot of use into making use of those different theories. Some are more from economy, others based in sociology, others are based in psychology, and we would waste a lot of intellectual potential if we would not use all of them. And then, of course, the empirical, experimental, and human-centered, if you want, participative approach. A little bit more practice, maybe. Sometimes I get asked, what is the right intervention level for these policies? And actually, I think they're all pretty interesting. And this is also why I kind of underlined it here, actually happens on the meso level, for instance, on the city level. Why cities? Cities are just ideal to try things out, ideal for experiments. They're small enough to really do its useful intervention. They're small enough to have those that are nudged participate, which is also very important to secure buy-in and also to make them simply more effective and smarter. Here, so one example is a C40 Good Food Cities Declaration, where Copenhagen has lead in the C40 arrangement, and we're actually helping a little bit with evaluating and doing some trials in this Beacon project. Whoever is interested in checking that out. So all of them are potential entry points, but probably based on my knowledge, the meso level is the most promising ones. Neighborhood, cities, but also large companies can be really interesting entry points. On the strategic level, again, short, mid, long term, there's no clear picture, I would say. It really depends. I brought you here the logo from the food summit that took place in 2021, where actually one of the results was a food action plan and a food strategy worldwide that hopefully will have also long-term consequences using behavioral approaches. And then the third question is, what do they actually do? Those behaviorally informed instruments, those nudges, this choice architecture. Do they complement existing policies? Yes, most of the time. Do they improve them? Yes. If applied well, they are absolutely able to do that. Do they substitute them? I would say rarely. Sometimes they do, but it's not, and some of defaults can work pretty well. Defaults are very strong and robust. They might be a good substitute for a while, but the bulk of the application is really in complementing and improving. Okay, what works where and why? Luckily, we're now about, I would say, 15 years in the field, not just we, but many of you and many colleagues worldwide. It's a good time to do some systematic evidence reviews, and this is what's happening. We also brought you a few that we did ourselves. Something interesting is something that we are just starting to do, which is evidence an ecosystem of reviews. So we share the work with 4 different research groups in Europe, and look at different policy instruments, and we use a harmonized screening strategy and inclusion criteria, use AI, because we're talking about like 50,000 studies, and try hopefully come up at some point, this is just the protocol, that's not the publication, with some estimate emissions and there with the potential of the effectiveness of different policies. So this is happening. Another idea is to make use of this new tools such as GPT-3 and see what is how those type of tools can actually help us. I think it's a very good time to do that, to also get an idea about the level of evidence we have regarding different tools. Do their work, effectiveness, and this is really very, very broad strokes, and I'm just going to run through that. We know things such as that more intrusive nudges tend to work better than less intrusive ones. We know that the more automatic behavior gets, the more the effect sizes, so if effect sizes are increasing. We know that overall those effects are rather small, and we're talking about food and modest, but in the end that might also count, because that adds up. It might also help develop habits. We know that reducing unhealthy eating is easier than increasing healthy behaviors. We know that interventions in high control settings are more effective than less controlled settings, such as stores. Sometimes I hear that interventions do not have an effect. I think that's wrong. They always have an effect. They might not have the effect that is intended, but they always have an effect. It's important to be sure and to know what the effect is. Overall, I think often they have low implementation costs, so kind of the effectiveness, the impact per unit is often acceptable. And also something that we and others have found out, that acceptability of those type of food nudges is rather high for different reasons, and it also increases when the effectiveness is communicated. So this is very, very rough, and you might disagree with one or the others. But I have to run a little bit. I'm now here with my last slide, because you've heard a lot. So what? One point that is really, really important to me is to kind of pause for a minute and ask, where there's now, which is a very, very good thing, that the field has come to a level and a level of development where we do have those debates that go pretty deep, that also involve theoretical debates, not just the what works, where and how debates, but we're kind of one step progressing one step further. On the other hand, I'm also sometimes a little bit surprised about some of the critique and some of the rhetoric out there. So I think it's very important to ask, when there is a debate, is that real? Can we show that empirically, or is that rhetoric? And both is happening. So let's look at the first, 6 ones. Nudges are an insult to human agency. They're based on excessive trust. They're covered. They're manipulative. They exploit. They're irrational. They kind of make use of the fact that people are irrational. Might be, can sometimes be, yes. But there is luckily now a lot of not just discussion, but also good ways how to, kind of rules for good nudging out there. There's a discussion about ethics, what to do, who to include, how to make everything transparent. So I think we have progressed here. So if in those debates, they should still take place, but I think we have progressed. The next two are a little bit more difficult, because I think, let's start with, this one. So nudges work only at the margins. There's a lot of overstatement, there's publication bias, there's overpromise. Yes, that is sometimes true. There's definitely also publication bias, but that's not unique to BI research, by the way. But then, as I said, sometimes because they're pretty cost-effective per unit, so they might make sense. Also, small amounts, small advances might also make a lot of sense. So even if someone saves 100 calories per day, that might make a difference in the long term. On the other hand, I'm fully aware of that. There has been a lot of overpromising and a lot of overselling in that whole field, which probably also has to do with that. It's still a policy innovation, if you want. And if there's a policy innovation, behavioral approaches, there is typically also kind of the need of showing this is novel and that works. So there is this kind of this tend to oversell things. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen. And the last one, nudges lead to opposite effects. There's backfire, compensation, crowding out of more effective policies. Again, yes, there are some cases and there's some initial evidence, but again, it's not really unique to behavioral interventions, and it is very important to be aware of those opposite effects, but that should not kind of be a rule out to make use of those approaches. And one of my heroes is Albert Hirschman, and he has, many years back, I think it must be in the 80s or 90s, he published this very nice book on the rhetoric of reaction. And he says that when there's a policy innovation, there's typically those three types of arguments that are made against it, which is jeopardy, so it's dangerous, these are the first six. Futility, it doesn't really make sense because it doesn't really work, it's too small, that's futility. And perversity, it really has the opposite effects, and that's the last one. So I'm not saying these are not relevant debates, I'm saying these are very relevant debates. What I'm saying is it's very often an empirical question, particularly talking about behavioral insights-based policies. It's very difficult to talk on the level, on the abstract level. It's so much better to make that very, very concrete. I'm almost done, Adam. I skip that. So should structural changes be preferred? That's a debate that has recently been has been conducted in a very intense manner. Let's put it this way to be neutral. That's kind of personal final statement, right? I think no single policy, nor a single policy approach should be expected to solve these major societal problems that we have started with today. Progress really requires policy packages, and we should be open to make use of all of them, with all their cons and pros. Structural changes tend to be more effective and more lasting, yes, because they're simply in place and they can have a lot of impact. Think of, I mean, if we just like getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, for instance. Yeah, they can be really, really beneficial. On the other hand, they depend on understanding and acceptance of pretty paternalistic policies, and that's not a given. That's not a given in a democratic society, and particularly also not in societies where you talk about polarization, misinformation, disinformation. People feel alienated, they feel a lot of unfairness. So this is not without danger. Processes are slow, lobbies are out there, coalitions are vulnerable. Which again doesn't mean don't do it. It just means we might need both. We might also need the fast boat and not just the big tanker. Structural changes are actually not always big and are not always impactful. They kind of come with that idea, but if we would have time and would look deeper into that, we would say it's not always the case. Weak structural policy is actually the worst. So a bad law, a law with loopholes, they can really be a major barrier for transformation because it's there, it's solved. We've done something, but it doesn't really do the trick. Structural and individual approaches are actually not antithetical, neither in theory nor in practice. So I personally think that those oppositional frames, they're simply not helpful. We really should try to think and do our debates in symbiotic frames. That's not for me, the word. It's from actually Brownstein et al., a very nice paper. And I think that you have here this, probably known to everyone, the duck or versus rabbit picture. So people see either a duck or a rabbit, but not at the same time. We cannot do that at the same time. But the other thing is always still there. It's not gone. Maybe the rabbit has a little bit of an advantage now because we're approaching Easter, but it's really something. I mean, try it. So bringing one to the attention inevitably forces the other into the background, but the background remains. And I think this is maybe something we can take from here, I hope so, that it does make sense to try to maybe also switch the background now and then and switch between more structural and more individual frames. Thanks so much.
Thank you.